All right, ladies, we are going to go through this as quickly as we can. Feel free to rewind or do whatever you need to do in order to keep up. But we are going to start talking about the landforms and resources of Africa. And we'll start with the actual, plateau of Africa and its rivers. And the thing is that Africa itself is actually a huge plateau. And remember, that's basically an elevated area that's flat on top. So it's sort of, the continent itself rises above sea level, but it's actually pretty flat on top of that. And in fact, it's 1,000 feet above sea level. There are many what we call, and this is in number 2, basins, B-A-S-I-N-S. And these are just depressions in the earth, and they can be as much as 5,000 feet deep, and that'll complete number 2 for you there. In number 3, the Nile River provides water for 3 countries, Uganda, Sudan, and Egypt. The Nile River provides water for Uganda, U-G-A-N-D-A, Sudan, S-U-D-A-N, and Egypt, E-G-Y-P-T. The Congo River spans 2,900 miles, 2,900 miles. That's in number 4. Now, to complete number 4, I'll tell you this. The Congo River is Africa's largest network of waterways. That's an interesting thing, though, because actually the Nile River, depending on how you measure it, some consider to be the largest or longest river in the world, depending on how you measure, if you count winding and those sorts of things. The Nile River is huge. But if you talk about the total network of waterways, everything that connects to the Congo, that makes it the continent's largest total network of waterways. So the Congo River spans 2,900 miles. It's Africa's largest network of waterways. And in number 5, Africa's hard to travel because of the waterfalls. These rivers are very difficult. So you hear rivers, you think, oh, you might be able to get around very well. But it's actually quite difficult because there's a lot of waterfalls. They are not easy to travel rivers. All right, going on to talk about rift valleys and lakes. Most of these are in the eastern part of Africa, East Africa. Now, in number 2, specifically, rift valleys are thin valleys in which East Africa is sort of pulling away from the rest of the continent. I'll say that again. They are thin valleys in which East Africa is pulling away from the rest of the continent. You've got basically, we talked about those plates earlier, you've got land moving apart from land, basically is what it comes down to. And number 3, there are lots of long, deep lakes in these valleys. So sometimes they fill up with water, and you can imagine the land pulling apart from itself, creates a sort of long area that can fill with water, long, deep lakes. The largest freshwater lake in the world actually is in number 4 there, Lake Tanganyika. Again, it's the longest freshwater lake in the world. Not necessarily the largest overall, but it's the longest. It is, in fact, they're 420 miles long and 4,700 feet deep. So it's a very large lake. The overall largest lake in Africa, though, not just the longest, the largest lake in the entire continent in number 5 is Lake Victoria. Lake Victoria is Africa's largest lake. I also want to mention very quickly that Mount Kilimanjaro is Africa's highest mountain, and it's also a volcano. So it's a high mountain that also has volcanic activity. You have the magma coming up and has the possibility for volcanic activity. All right, so the important question that we need to answer is, does Africa have any important natural resources? And the answer is that yes. Number 1, Africa has many, many important natural resources and minerals that can be found there. Many important resources and minerals. The problem is, in number 2, that they're not evenly distributed. Some countries have a lot of them, some countries have virtually none. So it's not very evenly distributed. The other problem in number 3 is there has been little industrialization. And that makes it difficult for African countries to get to all these resources because they don't necessarily have the equipment, however you want to word that. But the problem ultimately is that they might have these resources, but they might not have the equipment and the infrastructure in place to actually get to them. It does you no good to have great resources if you can't actually access them. In number 4, they do have large amounts of a number of resources, and you can actually see those on your screen there: gold, platinum, chromium, cobalt, copper, phosphates, and diamonds. You may have heard of, we talked about the fact that they have a lot of diamonds there before. You hear Tom Shane on the radio sometimes talking about how he goes to Africa to get diamonds. And number 5, part of the problem also is that, and this fills in the first blank, European colonial rulers. European colonial rulers developed these resources and exported them to Europe during the 19th and 20th centuries. So, the 18 and 1900s, basically. So the fact that the Europeans sort of took over the situation put Africa itself behind other nations. That finishes up number 5, though. This has put Africa behind other nations. So they have lots of resources. They haven't necessarily been used or utilized in a way that's going to help all of the people of Africa. Diamonds specifically have been problematic because, as you see there, in some places, the money made off of diamonds, in places like South Africa and Botswana, have been used to help countries. The money has propped them up. In other places, though, the money made off of diamonds has been used to fund very, very bloody civil wars. Angola, Angola, is actually an example of a place like that. But, that money has been used for purposes that you wouldn't necessarily want to see it used for. Now, we talked about how there's a lot of oil in the Middle East, but there's actually quite a bit in Africa, in a number of different spots as well. In fact, I'm going to give you 3 countries here. One is Libya, Libya, Nigeria, Nigeria, and I'm just realizing these are up on the board there, and Algeria as well. These 3 countries are leading petroleum producers, leading oil producers. And 2 other countries, Gabon, which you see written there, and also Angola, Angola. Both of those countries have, and this is in number 2, untapped oil. So oil that's there, they just haven't broken into the ground to get to it yet. At least not in all cases. There's still remaining oil under the ground there. In number 3, the United States has actually paid Angola for the rights to go drill their oil. The problem is the money that Angola makes off of selling those rights has been used to fuel an ongoing civil war. So, to finish off number 3, Angola spends the money they make on that oil on their ongoing civil war, and it's not going to the things it probably should go towards, such as, developing their schools and hospitals and things like that. So they spend it on the Civil War instead of things like schools and hospitals. Now, of course, oil is not the only money-making resource that exists in Africa. Their most profitable one, other than oil, is actually coffee. In fact, about 20%, 1/5 of the world's coffee comes from Africa. There's also lumber there. That can lead to logging being a problem in some areas, where, of course, cut down too much. And you can also get other things from Africa, such as sugar, palm oil, and raw cocoa, which we know has a number of purposes, and one of them, obviously, can eventually be turned into chocolate. To finish up talking about the resources here, agriculture, farming, is obviously critically important. In fact, the most important economic activity in Africa. So many families just depend on their daily farming to provide their own food. So it's the most important economic activity in Africa. That's number 1. Number 2 is that 66% of Africans farm for a living. So that's basically 2 out of every 3 people living on the entire continent of Africa. And remember, Africa's 50-something countries. It's a whole continent. About 2/3 of the people living there farm for a living. And about 1/3 of what they export, 1/3 of Africa's exports, meaning what they send to the rest of the world, are from farming. All right, moving on to the climate and vegetation of Africa. And a lot of the continent is actually quite hot. You can see there, if you see where my cursor is, a lot of it lies between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, roughly in those areas. Meaning that it's close to the equator. The equator kind of runs through the middle of the continent, so a lot of Africa is near the equator, and therefore very hot. The tropics are basically within 23 degrees latitude of the equator. In number 2, it is the Sahara Desert, which is, by the way, 3,000 miles long. It's wider than the entire United States of America. It stretches all the way from the Atlantic Ocean, on what you would see as your left there on the west coast there, or all the way to the Red Sea. which is be on your right or on the east of the map. It's 1,200 miles north to south, so it's not as wide as it is long, but still a lot of area going in all directions. It's extremely hot during the day, but the thing about deserts is they can often get freezing at night, so it kind of rubber bands back and forth. And although you expect deserts to be very, very sandy, and they are in some areas, only 20% of the Sahara is actually sand. Finally, there are other deserts as well. I'll mention those. They are the Kalahari, Kalahari, and the Namib Desert, Namib. There is hidden water at various points in the aquifers, as you see on the screen there. I'm not particularly worried about that part of it. Just know what some of these very large deserts are, and you can see them on the map there. The Sahara, huge at the top there. The Kalahari and the Namib kind of merge together down in the southern part of Africa as well. Now, like their natural resources, the rain in Africa is not necessarily distributed very equally either. Some parts, and this is number one, some parts of Africa can get actually too much rain, while others don't get nearly enough. Central Africa and also the western coast are the areas that actually get the most rainfall. And the rainy season can last up to 6 months. I mentioned the west coast as well, gets a lot of rain. But areas, the desert areas like the Sahara and other deserts, often they can go years without getting any significant rainfall. So you can see there's a lot of rain in some areas, and can even be flooding, while other areas don't get nearly enough rain to sustain hardly any life, and certainly are not hospitable places for people to live. Now, in some areas, you actually have very pleasant climates, and we call these areas at the northern and southern tips of Africa. This is number one, the northern and southern tips. These have Mediterranean climates. They get rain during the winter there. The average summer temperature is about 68 degrees. A lot of people love to go there and vacation for the very mild temperatures, and it's on the water, and they can actually be very popular vacation destinations. Africa has very grassy areas as well, including, as you see written on the screen there, the Serengeti Plain. That's number one. It is in Tanzania, and there's lots of grass, and that fills in the other blank there. Lots of grass, which is good for grazing animals. Now there's another area, and you see it sort of outlined there, called the Sahel. That's number two, the Sahel, S-A-H-E-L. This is a narrow band of dry grassland that runs east to west along the southern edge of the Sahara, and that's what you see outlined on your map there. And we're going to talk about that area a little more when we get to the human environment interaction section. So the Serengeti Plain, very grassy, as well as the Sahel, a narrow band of dry grassland that runs, again, east to west along the southern edge of the Sahara Desert, as you see on the map right there. Now, one of the other things that you've also heard about Africa is that there are a number of tropical rainforests there, and especially in, number one, Central Africa. There are a lot of tropical rainforests. That makes sense. The tropics, the middle part of the continent closest to the equator, that's where you're going to get your tropical rainforest. Most of the animals live in what you see in number two on your screen. Go ahead and fill that in. Most animals live in the canopies, which are just it's the top layer, the uppermost layer of the branches. Live in the canopies, which are the uppermost layer of the branches. But the term you see in number three there, slash and burn techniques used by farmers. Slash and burn by farmers is destroying these rainforests. In fact, over half of the rainforests that were once in Africa are actually gone now, because farmers wanting to clear more farmland will literally cut and burn these forests down, and it actually creates fantastic farmland, but the rainforests are being destroyed as a result of this. All right, I'm going to stop this part of it right here because it's going to cut me off at 15 minutes anyway. We'll pick up and we'll talk about human-environment interaction in the second video here.